had the 6.5 represented this week at Qualcomm IAA. I'm missing my bestie, but I brought our next newest a bestie, part of the 6.5, Diana Blast, brought the connected series there. And I can't wait to put those out. She did a great job. But IAA is kind of it's an event that converges sort of mobility and technology and then automotive. And every other year they kind of flip between transportation and mobility.
Yeah.
So this is the mobility year. Still full of cars, vehicles, drones, two-wheelers. Spent a lot of time with Qualcomm. Spent some time with CEO Cristiano Amon and automotive chief Nicole Dugal, as well as Chief Marketing Officer Don McGuire. So the company was in full force there. Had all its bigwigs there. And automotive has been a massive focus for Qualcomm. We've talked about this a lot, though, on the show. So not going to beat that to death. But that $30 billion pipeline is coming to fruition with these continued design wins that are coming from BMW, from GM, from from Mercedes-Benz. And by the way, there were some killer concept cars there, Pat. Really, really cool concept cars. Which is, by the way, it's like bringing love together for me. Vehicles.
Well, it's like torture. Yeah. It's you see these cars that may or may not actually ever see the light of day, right?
We just got to get rich enough that we can buy the concept car.
Jeez, yeah, probably not.
Mercedes had a killer cool car, and so did Porsche. Which, by the way, by the way, is it Porsche or Porsche?
Depends on where you are.
I've never quite known what's right.
German pronunciation would be the Porsche.
Okay. Well, they're right. And we're all
they kind of created the name. So
Dr.
Porsche.
But anyways, Qualcomm focused on, 3 or 4 really interesting things at this year's. One is we're moving from kind of ADAS and sensor-based AI in these vehicles to generative AI in the infotainment and management maintenance of the vehicles. So some digital assistant updates we're focused on is how generative AI is going to be part of these building blocks of the digital chassis. You're going to be able to kind of have an interactive digital assistant. So, and this brings a really interesting conversation about kind of when we're moving from device-based automotive control for infotainment to moving to fully onboarded generative capabilities. Because we all know that most cars today are, a lot of people are plugging into Apple Play. A lot of people are plugging into Android-based systems. And by the way, this still could be Android-based in terms of the interface, but in terms of, are we using the smartphone as the compute, or are we using the vehicle as a compute? And then for generative tools, where does that processing actually exist? So very interesting, but some very future-forward thinking about kind of how this digital assistant is going to work together. And then another one was the two-wheeler, Pat. So we've talked a lot about cars, but this was pretty cool. So,
and that was teased in the Financial Analyst Day you and I attended in New York this year.
Yes. And so, one of the things that Qualcomm really focused on, new partnerships with companies like Harley-Davidson. So, by the way, it's not only cars that are going to move to electrification. It's not only cars that are going to need a chassis, a digital chassis. So the ability to put building blocks of navigation and telematics and ADAS and infotainment, and then be able to provide the capabilities to do this with a smart chipset and then all on electrification, it's going to come to bikes too. So Qualcomm is able to identify a fairly large market expansion opportunity and also an opportunity to drive more design pipeline. And, there's a strong amount of demand. It's not just two-wheeler. I think it's just kind of the ability for Qualcomm to be the provider of intelligent platforms for sort of anything that rolls or flies or floats. I'm waiting to hear about the boating interfaces to come next, Pat. And
the corporate yacht,
the corporate yacht, and the yet, and the yar, and all the other things that you move around in. So that was another strong thing. And there are a couple of other things that were interesting too. Is more partnerships with another one with BMW was announced. And Pat, this is kind of just a trickle of constant for Qualcomm. And you've seen they've kind of flip-flopped with NVIDIA. NVIDIA was the big, and NVIDIA, while it's gotten all this data center growth in business, quietly, Qualcomm's kind of come underneath them and swiped a lot of design pipeline. And remember, this doesn't happen over like 1 or 2 years. So, the thing is what happens is over 4, 5, 6 years, this gets designed in and the revenue comes. So that's why a $30 billion pipeline is only yielding $300 or $400 million in revenue on a quarterly basis, is because these designs take time to come out, but then the revenue pivots. So what has happened is you've seen the kind of a steady flat to decrease across NVIDIA's revenue. It's because a lot of these new designs have gone over to Qualcomm. which this has been a real strength in its diversification. It's been necessary given kind of the rest of the portfolio and what's gone on in the market with mobile devices, for instance. And then the last thing, Pat, that was a big one is a design partnership with a mega hyperscale cloud provider for vehicles of the future. And that was a commitment that the companies AWS and Qualcomm made to co-innovate around the future in automotive and mobility. And that came out as well. So lots of announcement. I realize we're getting close to that time and you and I are going to have to run. So I'm going to hand you the mic to kind of give the last thoughts on the Qualcomm stuff. Since you weren't there, I figured I'd try to cover most of the ground here.
Yeah, you pretty much covered every single announcement related to Qualcomm there.
Yeah,
what I would like to dive into, though, is the very provocative announcement. It was really a three-way announcement between AWS, Qualcomm, and BMW. And by the way, very rarely do you see this from AWS. And while I don't have all of the skinny on it, I feel like I can say enough to say that Qualcomm likely brought AWS BMW, and BMW is going all in on the A100 or variants of it. And as we know about Qualcomm, their IP, it's building blocks, right? So similar building blocks, just more of it that you might find in a smartphone will be supersized when it comes to Qualcomm's automotive. And if you look at the A100, it's likely a supersized version of that. BMW needed a development environment. And by the way, AWS and BMW said this is about the Neue Klasse. That means the new class of cars set to launch in 2025. That is not a lot of time to be able to crank this out. But there was a quote from Dr. Nikolai Martin, an SVP at BMW, where he tied together AWS and Qualcomm technologies, which we don't see that often. And I have to wonder, what on earth is NVIDIA thinking about all of this? And you gave a little history. In fact, the history goes back all the way to where Intel was the preferred supplier for BMW and with Mobileye, and then that moved to NVIDIA, and it looks like BMW is all in on Qualcomm at this point, as we found to have a development environment taking those capabilities to the public cloud, where you essentially have endless capabilities, will be an interesting thing to follow. And I just have to wonder, is this truly I would call it the credible beginning, meaning Qualcomm, there were a lot of, what's the right word? Yeti sightings on Qualcomm's AI 100, but it never really made a connection. This is the first public cloud connection we've seen for Qualcomm's data center silicon. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen in the future here.